Good morning, welcome. If you are here for the Dementia 101 seminar, you are in the right place. We're going to give it just about maybe 30 more seconds for those who are logging in. We don't typically do a Monday morning webinar, so I'm sure if you're in the same boat, you may be looking in your email for that registration link and logging on now. So we'll give you just a minute to join us and then we'll get started. All right, well, welcome. Good morning. I am Kirsten Parsons. I am in a partnerships role with the three Ingleside communities. I'm going to introduce those this morning. Some of you might be familiar with our properties. We try to share our webinars widely. So you may be a resident in our community, you may be on our wait list, or you may be in one of the local villages in Montgomery County or DC or Northern Virginia. So we welcome you today. We are recording this webinar. So if you wanted to share this with a neighbor, an adult child, a partner, you will be able to share that link. What I'm going to do first is introduce our properties and some of the services that we're able to offer on campus and to those who don't live on our campus. And then I will introduce Jihan Starr, who is a geriatric care manager and a good friend and here on the call with us today. So Ingleside does have three nonprofit life plan communities. Ingleside at Rock Creek is our flagship property in Northwest DC. And all three of these properties do have all levels of care. So I'll introduce what those levels of care are, but I just do want to make clear that each one is a life plan community. And so in an area where we have many, many options and there are rental communities and communities that just offer assisted living and memory care, I do want to differentiate that all three are life plan. Westminster at Lake Ridge is our property in Northern Virginia. It is our only property that has cottages. They are on 64 acres. They're also going through an expansion right now and adding 24 more apartments. So if that's something that's of interest to you, I will share my cell phone at the end and you're welcome to text me about that. Our baby sister property is Ingleside at King Farm in Rockville, Maryland. There are the most apartments on that property, but it is our youngest property. It is right in a planned neighborhood called King Farm. It used to be a 2,000-acre farm, and so we love that you can walk to the grocery store or to restaurants, and there are townhouses and single-family homes that you pass, so it's a very intergenerational neighborhood. So levels of care. If this is something that you are not familiar with, I just want to spend a moment to explain what these mean. When we say we're a life plan community, we have independent living, assisted living, memory support assisted living or memory care, skilled nursing facility, all on one campus. That skilled nursing facility is where someone would do short-term rehab or long-term care. So to have that all on one campus, all three of those levels, independent, assisted, and skilled nursing or nursing home, is what makes something a life plan community. And then having some of these additional services are not required, but something that Ingleside's really proud to be able to offer in the greater community. Independent living, just like it sounds, is really a level of care where you're not receiving medical assistance, but you're receiving some of these concierge-like services. So housekeeping, there's some version of a meal plan, there's parking on site. I mean, it's just a more convenient lifestyle. There's these supportive services, but they're not medical. Even if there is a wellness nurse on staff or ways to receive some of that help, it's not assisted care for all of your activities of daily living. Assisted living is a licensed level of care where we do have nursing staff present 24 hours a day. So that's where someone could receive support with medication management or other aspects of their day, like grooming or getting dressed. When we talk about memory support assisted living, or what you may be familiar with as memory care, that's at that assisted living level. So an individual may be able to dress themselves or go about their day with not a significant amount of care needed, but because there's that neurocognitive change, we do have a secured neighborhood. The programming staff is a little bit of a higher ratio. Those programs are run more frequently. It's a little bit more assistive for the neurocognitive side. yes, medication management is done and meals, and there's still those other aspects, but it really leans heavy on supporting somebody who requires cueing and some guidance, and it's a residential setting. So they're there, that's their apartment home. Long-term nursing care and short-term rehabilitation. These services occur within what's called a skilled nursing facility or a nursing home. And these services could be short-term if somebody had a hospitalization and needed some rehab, or it could be long-term if someone permanently needed a high level of care. And so this is where you're doing therapy, where you could have services like an IV antibiotic or something that is really more intensive than what you would see in assisted living. Our communities all offer what we call Ingleside Engaged. This is a social day program. This is to support individuals with cognitive change who are in the early stages, so still living at home. You may be living in the greater community, so you're a neighbor of ours, and you actually don't have an intention of moving to a life plan community, but you are looking for ways to support your goal of aging in place at your home. So something like Ingleside Engaged could very much support that. If you, for example, are caring for a partner who does have cognitive change and you're thinking, you know what, the hardest part is that I can't be on 24/7. I would be, so supported if they could go somewhere for 5 or 6 hours a day or 4 hours or whatever the program links are at the various campuses. And so if this is something where you want me to put you in touch with our memory program directors so that you could see if this would be the right fit, we would be happy to get you connected. This functions on a daily rate where you would pay a daily rate for them to be there for that day. You could participate as little as 1 day a week or as much as 5 days a week, but it's not a residential option, just there for the day. And it is just social. So there's not a medical component. We're not able to provide insulin or to do any form of medications or any type of personal care. This is an opportunity to do an exercise class, a discussion group, coffee and chat. There's different therapies that come in, but none of it is medical. Again, kind of thinking about that aging in place plan. If you are committed to staying in your home and you want support in place, Ingleside at Home is a great way to get that wraparound care of a companion, staying with your loved one or supporting you after a hospitalization. It can be, again, short-term or long-term that you might need caregiver services in your home setting. We also have people in our community who are committed to staying in independent living, and they receive these services. And there's also individuals who do want to move to our community. They're on our wait list, but they do need some support in the meantime. So Ingleside at Home is flexible in how many hours you might need a companion to come in and support you. And then lastly, I want to share about Experience by Ingleside. This is our concierge service. This is non-medical. So if you're thinking, you know what, I'm on the wait list, I've got multiple life plan communities that I've picked out. Ingleside is one of them, and I'm just eager to move into a community. Whoever has an apartment first, I want to get those meals. I want to not have any more maintenance troubles. I don't want to take care of my lawn. So we've heard these complaints, if you will, and Experience by Ingleside was part of our answer to that. Of here's our team of vendors that we love and use and trust, have background checked. They all have insurances for their business, and we can say, yes, we've vetted these providers. And so meal plans, delivery of those meals to you, whether it's taking care of your lawn or maintenance. So this is a concierge service. It's one call for you. You call your concierge team member. Her name is Kat for our region, and she'll organize all this for you. And it's just one bill. So that is very convenient and helps support that kind of aging in place plan for the interim time that you might be on a wait list, or even if you were not on our wait list. I know that's a lot of information in a short amount of time. I don't want to take too much of Jihan's time, and I'm eager to hear from her. So if there is anything else that you're thinking, you know what, Kirsten mentioned it, but I didn't catch fully what she was sharing, or hey, I want to talk more about that, just text or call me. You are absolutely welcome to use, that's my cell there. We can either schedule a time if you feel like there's a lot that you want to unpack, or if you just quickly have a question, welcome to text or call. And then I can also put it in the chat as well. So without further delay, I do want to introduce Jihan. She is a care manager here in this region with us. Jihan is so generous to spend time with us today because she's a professional that I refer to when families are looking to plan. Often it's actually in crisis, which is unfortunate that it can get to that point where we need to quickly make a decision, and Jihan's able to step in with her expertise, more than 20 years of managing in healthcare, all different levels, and including kind of end of life care and then early planning. So to be able to have a care manager step in and kind of orient the ship and say, hey, let's head in this direction. Here's the resources that we want on board is huge. And I will say those services are expensive. And so it is an investment that you make to work with a care manager to say, I want to get my affairs in order. I want to pre-plan. Can I work with you for a few hours? In some ways, not different than working with an attorney. So that's how I always explain it. And Jihan is just so generous to spend some time with us today to help kind of give some information about dementia care and kind of what dementia means and different forms of it. And I will share Jihan's information if you want to work with a care manager after what you learned today and think, you know what, that would be super helpful. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides and I'm going to share Jihan's presentation on Dementia 101.
Very good. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. I know we are heading into the holiday season, or actually we've started already. So I personally appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Hopefully, I can share with you some information that you've not quite heard of before, or put some pieces together for you. Maybe even refresh your memory. I feel like if you have anything to do with Ingleside, you have been fully educated as much as feasible on exactly what dementia might look like. But this is something a little bit different. We're going to talk about what to do after a dementia diagnosis. What are your long-term care solutions? And really, what does that community support look like? And Kirsten, you can advance. I have to have her help me today. I have a little bit of uh, tech, tech issues. All right, here's our agenda. Uh, let's talk a little bit about dementia and versus normal aging. There's a difference. We'll talk about types of dementia. We won't get into all of them. There's over 100 types of dementia. We're going to talk about the four most common types of dementia, and how to build a support system after a dementia diagnosis. It's very important that you don't take that diagnosis and just go right home with a pamphlet. There's really a team that needs to be put in place to really support you and your family after a diagnosis. What are the financial implications? Kirsten just talked about two big things that usually happen after a diagnosis, and that's number one, potentially finding a place to live, and that can be very costly for some families. And geriatric care managers, while we're very, very good at what we do, we're very passionate about what we do, there's a lot of work involved in what we do because we're essentially stepping into your world and creating a care plan that is going to allow for this big support system in which I talk about to come to fruition. And then your long-term care solutions, which again will tie back into the buildings and the different types of care that Kirsten actually just mentioned. So let's get into it. Here's what I like to say, because it is something that you can really, really understand. How quickly life changes after you or someone has been diagnosed with dementia. Um, this is something that uh, all of us will sort of have to deal with if, in fact, someone you've been married to, or your parents, or even a sibling has been diagnosed with dementia, because nothing about your relationship with them or your family, even of yourself, remains the same. All right. So let's talk a little bit about normal memory loss versus loss of memory with dementia. I'm going to start on the right-hand side. Let's talk about normal aging first. Usually I go this way, but we'll go that way. While there is some memory loss that happens as we age, dementia is not guaranteed because we have grown older. And you'll hear me say on the other side, uh, something in reverse. But just because we're getting older does not mean we're going to have dementia, that we're going to be guaranteed a significant memory loss or cognitive decline. Yes, there's going to be some limitation with recall and the things that we do every single day. But if you just think about your organs working for so many years after so long, all of them get tired at some point, right? I just saw that Dick Van Dyke turned 100 years old. Now, that's considered old. And I don't think he has a diagnosis of dementia at all. In fact, I saw an interview with him and I was sort of very inspired by there being no cognitive decline. Yet he is older, so I'm sure there are some things that he just doesn't remember the way he used to, and some things he probably remembers perfectly. With normal aging, there are other diseases and illnesses that can also present as dementia. There are so many chronic comorbidities in which someone might endure from diabetes, hypertension, there could be COPD, there could be something going on with your kidneys or your liver. There's so many other things that can be going on in the body. And sometimes it will present as dementia because sometimes it causes some sort of memory loss or cognitive decline, or you say, wow, overnight my loved one just wasn't the way that they used to be. Doesn't necessarily mean they'll be diagnosed with dementia, but it's good to get checked out to find out, well, what could be causing this sudden memory loss? Some medications can cause an acute loss of memory. Those are medications that some people are put on for a long surgery. It could also just be how someone's body responds to a medication that they're put on for something totally different outside of dementia. And so sometimes it's always good to work with your primary care physician if you have a sudden onset of memory loss to find out what could it possibly be. Sedentary lifestyles, along with isolation, can also appear like dementia, and it can also lead to it. And we'll talk about that on that side. Um, it is so important that we remain as active as we can in our lifetimes, especially as we get older. I think we're naturally active when we're younger. First of all, when you're much younger, you're always outside. Between high school and college, there's travel, there's party, there's all the things. Once we start having children, we get into our office jobs, you maybe not having as much fun. I think we do a lot more sitting, and certainly when we're much older and we have any sort of disability or chronic illness that is making us stay in the house, you just live a bit more of a sedentary lifestyle and a lot more isolated. When you're older, you're no longer working, your family has moved out of town, they have their own children, you have lost people. And so isolation almost just happens naturally. But that can lead to dementia. Now, not remembering something from years ago is normal. I mean, even a day ago, it happens. I think all of us can say, God, I was just talking to her about what was I talking about? And then 5 minutes later, you remember. That's normal. I think our brains are literally over processing the amount of information that is coming in, not just from within what you have going on in your own orbit, but that of your family and then the world. So, not remembering something is okay. I think we are pumped with maybe too much information at the moment. Let's talk about dementia. Dementia is a term that refers to a cognitive decline. So your symptoms are going to be loss of thinking, remembering, and reasoning. Remember that have progressed enough to disrupt daily activities. So when you have dementia, which will eventually be diagnosed, it doesn't generally come on as sudden. It is something that you begin to see over time. Maybe the person with dementia can't quite put their finger on why they feel different. Maybe they don't even know to verbalize it, but something is just different. By the time it's noticeable by people from the outside, a diagnosis is sure to follow. Dementia is often confused with the normal loss of memory as we age. And again, we just talked about not being able to remember for something from a week ago. It will eventually come back to you, and maybe it won't, but it's okay because 99% of everything else you did last week, you remembered. It's really when you are not remembering very significant things, like maybe where you've put your keys, if you've placed them there for the last 30 years, or how to a telephone number that you used to dial every day and now you just can't gather the numbers. That's a little bit different. There are types of dementia that occur in younger individuals, and it is what we call young onset Alzheimer's. And I always share a personal story of both my grandmother and a cousin who died at 51 years old from Alzheimer's. And I remember she's young, she's only in her 46 or 47, and we just couldn't understand why she was so different. She didn't shower, her hair was undone, clothes were disheveled. At work, they were saying she was acting weird. She was sweating a lot. We had no idea that we were going to get the diagnosis of dementia. And sure enough, that's what it is. And when that younger onset dementia happens in younger individuals, the lifespan is so much shorter. It's 5 to 7 years. She literally died, I believe, within 5 to 6 years of her actual diagnosis. So dementia can occur in younger individuals. I'm going to talk most about what we see in older individuals because that's the population in which myself and Ingleside work with. No cure has been found for any type of dementia. I mean, we're going to talk about all types of ways to prevent it and all of the ways in which it can happen, but there has still been no cure. So I know we do the walks and we're paying into the research, and I am hoping one day that they do find a cure. I feel like they're getting closer because in order to find a cure, you have to 100% map out why it's happening. They've done a beautiful job, and you'll see with the research how they are able to uncover why certain things are happening in the brain. But it's not until we have that in full focus that we're able to then do a cure. There's also been tons of medication put out on the market, but even those just slow the progression. They are not a cure. And then lastly, there are ways to decrease your risk of dementia, but again, there's no guarantee that you won't get it. So because we're getting older doesn't mean we're going to get dementia. And although you do all that you can to prevent it doesn't mean that you won't get dementia. All right, let's go to the next one. So here are the most common types of dementia. You have your Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body dementia, frontal temporal lobe dementia, and vascular dementia. I'm going to break each of these down, but we're going to spend a lot of time on Alzheimer's disease because it is the most common of them all. So, Alzheimer's disease. I'm going to say AD for short because it allows us just to move a little bit more fluidly. Alzheimer's leads to brain changes and is most common cause of dementia. About 60 to 90% of people with dementia have Alzheimer's. When you think of the term dementia, I want you to think of an umbrella, a really big, beautiful umbrella, right? But on top of that umbrella, it is shielding off a bunch of rain. But off of the umbrella drips all of these different raindrops. Well, those are the different types of dementia. And in those raindrops, you would have an Alzheimer's or a Lewy body or FTD. So that's how I want everyone to remember the term dementia, because dementia can also happen if you have a traumatic brain injury or a car accident that you didn't know 30 years ago would disrupt the tissue in your brain. All right. So there's so many different types of dementia, but AD is 60 to 90% of those who have a diagnosis of dementia. We talked a little bit about the young onset. The late onset Alzheimer's signs first appear when a person is in their mid 60s. A person diagnosed with late onset lives for about 4 to 8 years. That can vary, though some may live for up to 20 years. And the time from diagnosis to death is longer than when a person is diagnosed a little bit younger. Now, this is where I share a little story about my grandmother who passed away from Alzheimer's disease. And this was a woman who was very healthy, and she wasn't on any medication. She had not had any hospitalizations. She did not have any comorbidities, any chronic illnesses, nothing of the sort. And my one of my aunts, her daughter, took her to LA at some point in early 2000s, and she also visited with me in the early 2000s. 2004 for me, 2002 with my aunt. And in 2002, she got lost in a hotel, which was very uncommon. We didn't understand. Oh, and she was in her late 60s at this point. She got lost in the hotel. She didn't remember quite how to get to the elevator and then up to the room. So my aunt thought, wow, that was odd, but okay, we'll kind of let that go. And in 2004, she came with me for about a week to visit after a foot surgery. And I remember she did all of the things that grandmas do, but we got in the car to go back to the hospital for a follow-up visit. And she got in the car and she said, well, what do I do now? And I said, well, Grandma, you got to drive. We got to get to the appointment. She says, no, but where do I put this thing? And I said, oh, you just put it in D for drive. And she said, ah, okay. I'm assuming because she drove the van, that has this lever up here that she just didn't know. And that's what I thought in 2004. not knowing that 10 years later, 2014, she'd be gone. And when we all realized that she had it was only after my grandfather's death, a death that we didn't see coming because he had a cancer he did not share with us. So now we're both surprised that we just lost grandpa. And now her routine, and you'll find that with someone with Alzheimer's disease, is that you have these little tiny flags, and then you have a moment in time in which it is clear something is not right with your loved one. And it was at that time, back in 2006, that he passed, and we saw this complete change in her. So from 2006 to 2014, we watched her decline. So this is why I said 48 years is pretty short. Some can live up to 20 years, and she had about a 15-year span. Alzheimer's is neurodegenerative. It's a disease that causes damage to the neurons, to the nerve cells in the brain. Changes in the neurons and loss of connections between them cause the brain to shrink and inflame. This process can start decades before any symptoms show. That's why I give the description of my grandmother, because her symptoms started decades before, and then we finally had a chance to see them. So, what are the risk factors? So, more than 90% of Alzheimer's cases do occur in people 65 and older. But I still started with saying because you're 65 and older does not mean that you'll get it. But because you're 65 and older, and if you're at risk for it, you being 65 puts you at more of a 90% chance. Um, about 10% of people after the age of 65 and about 40% after the age of 85. Um, it's not rare that you see it in the people after 85. That's why I say it's about 40%. You do see it, but I feel like it's not as severe, and that they could also be dealing with other chronic illnesses at that time, but it does happen later. But most of the time, it's going to be that 65 to 70 in which that diagnosis is going to come, um, and then more into the 70s and then more into the 80s. The genetics and the family history, as well as depression, can lead to the risk of Alzheimer's disease. So you guys may have heard it, and I'm not going to get very clinical on this call, of the APOE gene. They have tests out now that allow you to determine if, in fact, you have this gene. And most of the time, people are seeing if they have this gene because they've learned that someone in their DNA, in their family tree, has had it. In that case, if you do learn that you have it, you are more at risk because you have had this gene. However, my grandmother was the only one that we can recall, because so many people in her family, she was one of 22, by the way. Out of all of her siblings, two only still left. A lot of them died of sudden heart attacks. We weren't able to trace that a lot of them, or any of them, really had a long-standing history of Alzheimer's disease. So genetically, we don't feel like we're going to get it because she had it, but could we get it because we, in fact, have a brain and we're now over 65 and maybe have been depressed or isolated or all the things? Then absolutely. So that's the way to think about it genetically. The vascular blood vessel. So your blood vessels conditions, which include high blood pressure or hypertension, what we call it heart disease and stroke, those are major risk factors. And we're going to talk a little bit about vascular dementia. And so I think a lot of us realize as you get older, your cholesterol almost naturally becomes higher for whatever reason, as well as your blood pressure. And we know that in some communities and in some genders, that blood pressure can be even higher. But these are direct link to dementia because there are so many blood vessels in which we're using to pump blood into the brain. Once those become constricted and narrowed, you're really not allowing your brain to get all that it needs. And we just talked quickly about the diabetes, midlife obesity, learning a lot about what happens, especially to women with the perimenopause and menopause, and waking up and being 2 pounds heavier, not understanding why, and how what hormones are triggered in perimenopause directly are linked to cholesterol. We can do a whole nother topic on that if you guys will have me back and if you need it. Um, but there's something about that midlife obesity that kind of happens to all of us, both men and women, because we're all going through sort of a menopause or an andropause, and therefore our hormones are sort of doing their own thing. Um, our life is changing a little bit, so we are eating a little bit more. But all of that does make a difference. Again, all of these things can lead to potential dementia. Social isolation and loneliness can also lead to higher risk of Alzheimer's. We also talked about a TBI, someone who's had a traumatic brain injury. Um, it's a disruption of normal brain function caused by a blow or jolt. So let's go back and let's talk about the two things. When we were in the midst of COVID and all of the isolation which we all experienced, we lost so many people to two different diseases. Of course, a lot outside of COVID, mental health issues and Alzheimer's disease. That isolation in which they no longer had that routine and the socialization in which they would have in an adult day program or when their aide came to visit or their grandchildren, right? Then they became even more isolated and lonely because now we're dealing with a disease in which we're afraid to go over to someone's home. Well, that really does change your brain function. In fact, people who remain isolated almost 365 days is almost like smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. That is how unhealthy it is to be lonely and isolated. And then you add in their depression. It is changing literally the metabolic way in which your brain is functioning. Now let's go to a TBI. Traumatic brain injury is something that you and I only probably think about when we see boxers punching each other's lights out or these poor NFL players that are being diagnosed with CTE and taking themselves out of here because they've had that brain injury. But guess what? Seniors with Alzheimer's disease and not people who are just unstable on their feet, the moment you fall and hit your head, you are at risk for a TBI, which is in fact leading to a brain injury, which can then lead to dementia because you're injuring a part of your brain because each lobe is responsible for some sort of input and output. Therefore, it's being injured. So if you're ever moving into a community like Ingleside, or working with a geriatric care manager, or have ever had physical therapy, ever been hospitalized, we talk so much about fall prevention because it's not just about your hip, it's about your brain. Just want you all to keep those things in mind. Um, Heavy alcohol use is also associated with changes in the brain and cognitive issues, including dementia. You can imagine if you've ever had a sip of anything, you know instantly you feel different. For some people, it feels good. For others, it's like, I'm never going to drink again. I do not like the way that I feel. So we know innately that it changes the chemicals in your brain because you no longer feel as normal as you did without it. But now there's an addiction. You are rewiring in which the way in which your brain works because you have now induced this chemical that is changing everything. Heavy alcohol use and smoking can increase your risk of dementia. The difference with smoking is that when you quit, if you can just quit, you can reduce that risk. Unfortunately, with heavy alcohol use, man, once that damage is done, especially to your kidneys and liver that are really, really working overtime, it's really hard to reverse. But I think we've all heard that quitting smoking can really, really be beneficial. Here's another something. Um, Hearing loss can also be associated with Alzheimer's disease, though the mechanism for that is unclear. But there are pathways in the brain from your hearing and your eyesight that function sort of together. And so if you have dementia, low vision, and low hearing, boy, that impact is even more forceful because those are the ways in which you communicate, right? Processing it through the brain, maybe watching people and what they're saying, reading their mouth, maybe watching their body gestures, hand movements. And then if you can't hear them, well, now you can't really hear what they said. You can't quite communicate. So all of those different pathways sort of work together in the brain. And therefore, if there's any issues with the hearing, it may be associated with Alzheimer's disease. All right, we can move on. So And the amyloid, um, let's just talk tangles in protein. I'm moving my screen around so I can see it. To the left is something in which you see a normal brain. If you look in this, I don't even know, you can't even see my cursor, but if you look on the left-hand side, you can see that the brain, look in the middle where the butterfly is. You can see that the brain has sort of its fullness to it, right? There's no atrophy. If you look down from that, you'll see a healthy neuron. That is a neuron that's put together. Think of a chain, and it's just nicely put together. And so now when we communicate with each other or with ourselves, that healthy neuron is transmitting whatever it needs to the brain. And because the brain has no atrophy, it's now pulling in that information. But if you go over to the right, you will see atrophy. Atrophy is when something is beginning to shrink a little bit. And so therefore it's not as bountiful. We don't have the full capacity of the function of the brain because it's now atrophying. And even when you where you see sort of the tip of the hippocampus, you can see it there. Then look down and look at that neuron and look at how unhealthy that neuron is. It is broken up. Now imagine trying to get, sorry, I'm just trying to see if there's, but I keep forgetting I can't pull anything up because of my tech issues. Um, but if you take a look at this neuron over here, I mean, it is almost like a bomb exploded on it. So how is it that if we're trying to communicate or process something or pull something, if it is broken in the way that it is, how can this part be disconnected from that part, but what we're trying to recall or receive actually gets to that part, right? And we're not a person, so it's hard to explain, but you can literally look at both sides of this. Now, let me just share with you really quickly. So when we talk about an amyloid plaque, that is sort of a sticky clump of a protein that builds up in the nerve cells. And those are literally outside of the cell. And that can disrupt communication between the nerve cells. But then a tangle is like twisted strands of protein that accumulate inside of the neuron. So that's inside of the cell. And that will block the transportation of nutrients along the cell's internal pathways, causing the cell to eventually die. So plaques and tangles are different. I don't want to get again too clinical because it becomes so confusing. These are all of the things that they're breaking down in order to one day have a cure for it. So let's move on so we can get to some of the other ones here shortly. Symptoms of AD, it typically presents with memory problems first. You can't remember some things. We're around the holidays, and if grandma or mama or whomever has been baking a coconut cake for 30 years, she does not need a recipe. She does not uh oh, they're trying to get my picture to be somewhere else. I'll let the team work on that. She does not need a recipe or list. She can go into the cabinet and pull out all of the ingredients, put it on the table, and bake the cake. But someone with Alzheimer's, when we talk about memory problems, will not even know the first ingredient. They won't even know or remember or recall 50% of what goes into this cake. That should be an alarm for someone. People may have difficulties remembering recent conversations, names, or events. I use this as an example. You just met with Kirsten. She talked a little bit about Ingleside. I'm talking about dementia. Now, if in 2 weeks someone says, "Hey, how did you feel about that amazing presentation that Kirsten and Jahan put on?" And someone says, I just don't even remember that. And you're saying, but no, I was on there with you. We talked about it, right after. And they say, no, I really just I literally don't remember it. Again, that is not normal. These changes can begin very subtly, but more drastic than natural aging. So they can interfere with your daily activities. Maybe that's paying your bills, using your phone. It does become progressively harder for someone with Alzheimer's to make sense of the world around them. Um, at some point, they're unable to function the way that they used to without the help of someone else. This gets really hard when we're dealing with people who are brain surgeons, people who were the top lawyers or who've created new inventions, you name it, because you know that their brain has always worked beautifully, and you're watching them become so dependent on others because they can't make sense of the world around them anymore. Memory loss that's progressed enough to interfere with your daily life. That's what we're talking about. Um, Remembering to put on shoes that match, remembering that pants go on your bottoms instead of your top, and the inability to follow through with tasks such as paying bills or playing games. If you've been an avid tennis player or golf player, and now someone puts the rack or the club in your hand, and you're like, well, what is this? Again, that's more drastic, but that is something that you see over time. And then losing track of time and dates. Those are really essential, especially with the climate that we're in. And anytime we do a MOCA screening, which is basically a memory test, that's one of the first things we ask. Because if someone can know that today is the day it is, the day it is, the time of year it is, even to a season, then we might be dealing with something different. But if they tell you, I couldn't tell you any of that, then yes, we're dealing with something a little bit different. All right. Symptoms of AD: continued impaired reasoning and judgment, resulting in new issues with problem solving, decision making, and activities such as shopping or cooking. You'll find that these folks are leaving things on the stove, right? You've had plenty of house fires, unfortunately, where someone has left something on the stove because they forgot that they were cooking. These are folks who used to pay their bills on time and now they just can't grasp that idea. The visual and spatial issues may affect balance. So, we talked earlier about the pathways with hearing and loss and dementia, and just being able to communicate and process things. But those visual and spatial issues do affect balance because now, again, there's different parts of your brain that are being impacted by either these proteins or these plaques or these Lewy bodies. Therefore, falling is even more at risk because you can't tell if a curb is elevated or flat. You can't tell if a window is sort of open or closed. And so sometimes that also creates fall and confusion for people that have symptoms of AD. These are things that you should be looking for yourself and for others. New problems with speaking or writing. Maybe your loved one or yourself has been a beautiful orator all your life. You've been a great author. And now you sit down to video yourself talking about something or start writing a new book and you just cannot find the words. You can't even put your thoughts together. That can be scary for someone. Now you're isolating from work and hobbies and social life. Again, if this is happening early on, then you can sort of hide that a little bit. But once we're all onto it, you can't hide it. You're probably no longer working or enjoying hobbies or social life. Although folks at Ingleside try to create every single way in which you can still remain as social, but in a capacity that works for you at this state that you're in. Mood changes that resemble depression or anxiety, and personality changes such as increased impulsivity or aggression. This is where you might begin to see hoarding happen, where someone is buying 100 of something, either they don't remember or it's just an impulse, or aggression, especially during sundowning. They're really, really showing signs of probably exhaustion. I know we call it aggression, but can you imagine living in a body that once was 100% yours, your mind and your body and your soul, and all of a sudden you can no longer control it? You can no longer understand it. You don't know how to maintain it. You become aggressive. You become exhausted from the thoughts in your mind, but you can't get the words out of what you're experiencing. But that is something that you begin to see in people who maybe never had behavioral issues or showed aggression at all. This is when you might begin to see that. I'm going to take a sip here. We can go to the next slide. So your stages of AD vary. I like this little shot over here of the brain. It shows you the different lobes. Each lobe is responsible for something else or something different. And yes, I can talk a little bit about that. Um, someone in the chat is asking, we can talk about sundowning a little bit. And We'll talk about that a bit. But the Alzheimer's has three different stages, and these do vary. Mild disease, moderate disease, and severe disease. Friends and family may notice disruptions to everyday function, memory loss, confusion. When it's more moderate, this is the stage in which people require more supervision. So now your loved one is asking for more prompting and for more lists and more things to remind them of what they need to do. And severe disease is more damage that spreads throughout the brain. So these are people that lose their ability to communicate and literally care for themselves. And to the point near the end, they're having trouble with swallowing and controlling their bowel and bladder. They become severely incontinent. Now, I have a video below. It's no more than 60 seconds. Kirsten, when you do click it, I don't know if it's going to be big for everyone. It's not going to expand, but hopefully you can hear it. But this is, I think, is 60 seconds. Um, and this is a gentleman in the gray suit who's been following this couple for 10 years. What I want you to simply recognize as we're talking about the stages of AD is where she was at the diagnosis and where she was at the end. Also, pay close attention to her caregiver, what we call care partners, because you will be able to see that this was not just her disease, this was also his disease. It became their disease. So Kirsten, click it and see if
Yeah,
everyone
let
can
me
hear.
see. I don't think enable video sharing, so we'll send out the link if it doesn't
Okay, that's
share.
okay. Yeah. Okay, no, we can't hear it. Okay.
When
All
you
right.
heard the word Alzheimer's,
Uh,
what did that do to
He
you?
was devastated.
What makes this story so unusual is that almost every year for the past 10 years, we've interviewed Mike and Carol as Alzheimer's took over her brain. Even though this is intensely personal, they wanted all of us to see the devastating impact of Alzheimer's on each of them over a decade. What's your husband's name?
My husband's?
Your husband's name?
Yeah.
The guy sitting to your left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That just goes to show you that this disease takes exactly who a person used to be. She answered the question on year one. She was devastated to get that diagnosis of dementia, of Alzheimer's, excuse me. It processed the question and she understood it. 10 years later, he asked her a question that should be very simple to answer for someone. Something about their spouse. They've been together for decades, and she couldn't even process what the question was, let alone to answer it. So that gives you sort of an idea of what these different stages look like. And Kirsten, we can go to the next one. The next slide will also show a little bit about the stages of dementia, and that will give you more of a sort of more of a time frame. But again, we've already talked about this in which it can vary. MCI is something that most might, I shouldn't say most, but some are diagnosed with that may or may not eventually lead into Alzheimer's disease. But mild cognitive impairment is about a 7 year, and that's sort of medial temporal lobe. The symptoms are more short-term memory loss, so they can usually recall something from 10 years ago, but not necessarily from 5 minutes ago. And then you'll see here the mild, the moderate, and the severe Alzheimer's, all the duration in which you might be in each of those stages, and we can move forward. All right, I want to quickly wrap up Alzheimer's because I want to talk about some others and not keep you on too long. But the early diagnosis of Alzheimer's is crucial because most available medications work for earlier stages of the disease. There are medications that are out right now that help slow the progression. Again, there's no cure. But this is a disease that is progressive, and for some people it goes a little bit faster, for some slower. And so these medications aren't built for someone who's had dementia for 10 years and now they're in the more severe stage. These are medications, and I just have it highlighted because I always want to make a note of it, that as soon as you receive the diagnosis, hopefully you've noticed these symptoms right on time, that you will be able to live a little bit longer and remember and recall a little bit longer because of what these medications do. Your healthcare provider, to get your diagnosis, will do multiple evaluations to confirm the diagnosis. So they're going to do questions about a person's medical history, symptoms that they've been experiencing. They're also going to talk to family and friends just to get an idea of if they've seen anything different. You might even get a psych eval, a psychiatric evaluation. We say psych eval because mental health conditions can mimic Alzheimer's disease and just need to be ruled out. Yes, someone can have both. Um, you're going to get cognitive tests, you're going to get lab tests, imaging, and dementia-like symptoms aren't always due to brain-changing diseases. Some conditions that cause cognitive issues can be treated to reverse the symptoms. That would be something like a UTI or what have you, or some sort of injury that has caused the memory loss, but it is impaired. Uh-oh. Am I on two different screens? It is imperative that we find exactly what is causing the symptoms so they can either rule it that it's dementia or rule it out. Your healthcare provider can help rule out cognitive decline if there, in fact, is untreated depression, untreated sleep apnea, if you are having side effects due to any sort of medication. If you've had Lyme disease and it's been untreated, thyroid conditions, and lacking in some vitamins such as B12, very, very important. And what we've talked about before, drinking too much alcohol. So there is a way to determine if you are in fact at the early stages of dementia, or is your body going through something or another type of disease brewing that you now need more assistance on. And we go to the next one. I want to get into the other three, but not before we end up with Alzheimer's disease. Largely because a lot of some of what you see in Alzheimer's disease, you'll see in the other ones, but there's some differences. There are medication and trials because, again, there's no cure, but there are some treatments that focus on slowing down the progression of the disease. And then we talk about prevention tips, managing your heart rate, regulating your blood pressure, eating a healthy diet. If you're smoking, quit, reduce your alcohol use, and exercise regularly. I always like to say we never want you to go to the gym and try and get a six pack anymore. We're simply saying that the more you move your joints, your muscles, your bones, you're activating your brain. And it's just so helpful when you want to slow the progression of a disease that is starting in the brain. And stay cognitively active. Being on something like this is making your brain think a little bit differently. You're sort of out of your routine today. That's very helpful. We always say sometimes brush your teeth with a different hand sometimes. It can help make your brain do something a little bit different. And then stay socially active. So if you have not yet joined Ingleside, they have so many different types of programs and music and activities, you name it, to make sure you never have to be isolated in a place like that. They even allow you to come and visit even if you've yet to move in. So please keep that in mind if you are finding that you are becoming progressively isolated and lonely at home. All right, we could go to the next one. All right, so let's get into the other types of dementia because there are more. And Kirsten, you can go to the next. Yep. So we're going to talk first about FTD. And again, these slides will be brief, but I want you to be able to see a little bit of the difference. So the Alzheimer's disease is your green brain and the FTD is your red brain. So FTD changes in personality and behavior first. That is something you will see before you see memory loss. You'll probably be so thrown sometimes by the behavior or the language being used by someone with FTD or just sort of their being withdrawn that memory doesn't come into play. Because at this point, you're looking at how impulsive they are, that they lack any sort of empathy. They may become mean. They may begin to curse. They may become withdrawn. So someone who's been very social now is very quiet. Language difficulties or loss of speech. Someone with Alzheimer's disease can still talk. Might be a little bit jumbled at first, maybe not so much, but the language difficulties in FTD become so much that they are having a hard time just kind of getting words together and out. Movement problems. This is sometimes why people think they may be on the brink of Parkinson's disease because now they're having issues with moving their joints. And then also, memory loss is often less of an early symptom compared to Alzheimer's. So in Alzheimer's, memory loss is one of the things that you will see first. Then a difficulty with language and planning, concentration as the disease progresses. And then hallucinations and delusions are more common in advanced Alzheimer's than in FTD. We can go to the next slide. Now let's get into Lewy body. So Lewy body, the differences between Alzheimer's and Lewy body is different. So in Alzheimer's, memory loss is usually the first. We keep saying that, and a very noticeable symptom. In Lewy body, people often experience movement problems early on, such as stiffness. Now, in Alzheimer's, we've talked about memory. In FTD, we've talked about behavior. And in FTD, we've talked about movement. So you will notice all of these in each of them, but it's sort of how they start. So in LBD, they experience movement problems, stiffness, and shuffling while walking, and where you begin to see people fall. They may be going in to get a check to see if they, again, have Parkinson's. Attention and alertness. People with a Lewy body often have fluctuating levels of alertness. One day they can be clear, focused, high energy, and the next day completely confused and drowsy. And Alzheimer's, your mental decline is steady, it's consistent, it progressively declines. Visual hallucinations, commonly, LBD commonly causes visual hallucinations early in the disease. This means that a person might see people, animals, or objects that are not there, but seem very real to them. So you may find them to be very fearful. Hallucinations are rare in the early stages of Alzheimer's, but they can occur in the later stages. Sleep disturbances. People with LBD often act out their dreams or move around a lot during sleep. This condition is REM sleep. I think we've all heard about that. But they have a quite disturbed sleep. Sleep problems can happen with people in Alzheimer's, but it's usually insomnia, trouble falling asleep or staying awake, but it's not as active. It doesn't feel as real to them as they're sleeping. They're sort of just sleeping. In response to medication. So people with Lewy body are very sensitive to certain antipsychotic medications and may have severe side effects. So if you think your loved one is experiencing a mental health issue and you take them in, and they're possibly given a psychiatric medication, but eventually the diagnosis leads to Lewy body, and you notice that they had a very severe reaction to the medication. This is another telltale sign. And they also have the severe effects like the movement problems, where Alzheimer's patients may sometimes take these medications with fewer complications, though they still are monitored. And now we can go on to the next slide. Let's talk about vascular dementia. Vascular dementia is the term for any changes in cognition or brain function that occur from damage to the blood vessels in the brain. The condition affects memory, thinking, and behavior. This is something that you would typically see in someone that has had extremely high blood pressure over the years or have had a stroke. If you are hypertensive with diabetes, it is really oh gosh, that is a combination that is kind of scary because it can lead to a vascular dementia if together. But if you have hypertension, you've had a stroke, and sort of your diet, the loneliness, all the things that we've talked about, it can absolutely lead to a vascular dementia. And that is exactly what this is showing. Vascular, it's all about those blood vessels in which we've talked about. Alzheimer's, it's more about the neurons, the plaques and the tangles. So you see how dementia is caused, but this is a very good way of seeing it's happening in different parts of the brain, and it's happening for different reasons. Therefore, some of what the symptoms are going to appear different. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about VD. When vascular dementia occurs after a stroke, Changes in thinking and behavior may occur suddenly. So if damage to the blood vessels happens deeper within the brain, the cognitive changes more occur gradually. So early symptoms of VD may include confusion, impaired judgment, and difficulty speaking, which is something we often see in our stroke victims. Physical symptoms of a stroke, such as paralysis or numbness on one side of the body, we've seen that. And depending on where the damage occurs, the memory loss may or may not be a key symptom of vascular dementia. So if it's on one side of your brain, you may have lost motor function and the ability to speak. But if it's happened on another side, you could probably still speak, but your memory and your recall are damaged. So it does depend on what side. Symptoms of vascular dementia include difficulty performing everyday tasks, difficulty following instructions or taking in new information, forgetting past or current events, misplacing items, often not being able to find them, getting lost just going home, language problems, trying to find the right words, difficulty reading and writing, changes in sleep patterns. Your mood or personality does change. Some people do become very depressed or angry or agitated, losing interest in other people or hobbies. Hallucinations or delusions can also happen with this type of dementia. And a lack of judgment and inability to perceive danger. That is something that someone with VD would typically experience. All right. After a dementia diagnosis, what is your next step? It is tough to hear it, but this is what we do. The essential components of a support system. You're going to have medical and professional oversight. You almost have to. Emotional and family support, very necessary. Geriatric care management, which is what I'll explain a little bit. And long-term care options, which is what Ingleside provides. So let's get into it. So medical and professional support and guidance. And so you have here to your top left, I sort of put that picture up there to show that there's going to sort of be a medical team now, right? Now we have to see all of your specialists. If there's any COPD or oncology or nephrology, you name it. But mainly your neurologist and your primary care physician are going to be working as your main primary sources because they need to work together to determine what type of Alzheimer's you have, or excuse me, what type of dementia, and how we're going to treat it. The second thing most people put in place, which is right next to that, is help in the home. If you've already noticed that someone has become sort of tired and exhausted after trying to get themselves together or meal prep because you're realizing that there's something more. A lot of people go right from a diagnosis to potentially getting a few days or a few hours of a private duty aide or a certified nursing aide into the home to assist with light housekeeping, meal prep, maybe help with medication administration. And then you're going to go right over to a financial advisor because now we realize we're dealing with something that's going to likely cost. You don't know yet how it's going to cost, but you realize that if this is something progressive and not reversible, that now there's additional monies that we need to allocate to what this looks like for us. If you've retired, if you have an investment portfolio, some people don't have any of that. This financial advisor, if you have assets, can help you determine what you can afford. And estate planning, we have to get an attorney involved almost right away, because if you're at some point no longer going to be able to make your own decisions, this is a time that you want to get things in black and white so that your loved ones and the people who are going to become your support system know exactly what your wishes are, and that attorney will help follow them out. I now have here a picture of a senior community that is Ingleside, one of Ingleside's buildings. Ultimately, some people cannot reside at home anymore. The home is just not conducive to aging in place for whatever the reason. It could be steps, it could be the fall risk, it could be the location, it could be the cost, it could be any of it. And so what do? You want to go ahead and start taking tours of memory programs and things like the memory assisted living that Ingleside has, because some people will be able to age in place. They've set it up already, or it can be set up because their home is viable. And if not, then you are likely going to look into moving into a place that will suit your needs as you decline or as the disease progresses. And then lastly, I have a picture of what I do as a geriatric care manager. Um, there are geriatric care managers who are nurses, who are social workers, nurse practitioners. They've been in the field, and we've dedicated our lives to helping you all figure out what's next. And even if you kind of know what's next, we help you to coordinate it all. So let's go over because there's more than the medical and the professional support. Let's talk about your emotional support, the family dynamics. Um, are you a surviving spouse with adult children, meaning there was two of you, now there's one, and your children will now likely have to assist with helping you move forward because now you have this diagnosis and you need a support system. Maybe there's no other family, it's just you and a sibling. It's maybe just two of you, and now someone has dementia. Well, now are you likely the person that's going to have to take over and assist that sibling? The adult child caring for living parents. Yes, I've seen two people that have had needs at one time in which their single child has had to now handle both parents. We largely get those calls quite a bit because they are also trying to work and raise their families. Other relatives actually willing to help. I have a client now whose relatives live out of the country. One is in Europe, the other one's in Arizona, but she's in DC. And she has church members and neighbors, as well as a care manager, and also a certified nursing assistant that comes in to support her because she actually doesn't have any relatives. So you either have relatives willing to help or non-relatives who become responsible for helping. Your neighborhood, villages, and programs and volunteers are necessary. If you are someone who's been spiritual or religious your whole life, this is a very good time to get those folks on board. Community centers and support groups, a lot of support groups out there for both people with dementia and the caregivers. County programs like the fire and police department. It's okay to go over and explain that you have a loved one that lives in row home 21. And if you ever get a 911 call, we just want it to be on your log that this person has dementia. Childhood friends may be able to assist you because maybe they're retired like you, or they have the flexibility, and because you've been best friends forever, they jump on in and assist. Sometimes your employers has help where they allow you so many days off. Some employers even now are helping to pay for the cost of some of the certified nursing aides. If you have in-laws that can support you, I've experienced it myself where my father-in-law was unfortunately dying of cancer, and my family stepped in to help me care for my husband's family. And then a therapist or a counselor. Let me share this with you. Um, there's so many caregivers who are considering therapy and counseling because they already are grieving the idea that they're losing their loved one right in front of their eyes. They're still here, they're still breathing, they're still walking and talking, but they are realizing the sadness and the grief that are coming with watching them sort of endure this process. And then also, I've been told because this process does get very tough, you sometimes also want to check in with some sort of counseling to make sure you're not losing it. I've had too many care partners that say, after repeating myself so many times or not being able to take care of me and having to take care of them, I feel like I'm just sort of losing it, losing myself. So therapy and counseling can be very beneficial. I wouldn't stigmatize that potentially being part of your support team. And we're just about to wrap up here. Let's talk a little bit about care management. Kirsten started off by saying it's kind of like paying an attorney. Yes and no. The cost of it likely because the cost can increase as services are needed. It does sort of eventually pan itself out. But what I tell people is that if you found value in what a geriatric care manager does, the money won't matter, especially up front, because you will be so thankful that someone has stepped into your world and has changed everything for you. And you were able to continue to live your life, yet your loved one has been safe. Or if it's for you, you now have a support system sort of in just one person. So age and life care professionals provide answers at a time of uncertainty. It's just what we do. And like Kirsten said, we often get the call at a crisis. So we have to step in and kind of untangle things. We prefer to get the call at the diagnosis so we can be with you along the journey and we know how to implement things along the way. But we're geriatric care managers. It's a holistic client-centered approach to caring for elders, adults, and others facing ongoing health challenges. We work with working with families. Our members are in-person guidance leads to actions and decisions that ensure older adults, quality care and optimal life. Family caregiving coaching. We do a lot of coaching for the care partner. We do assessments and monitoring. So we do weekly visits. Planning and problem solving. We certainly help with this. This is how we sort of get through each stage. Medication management, education and advocacy. And we try to reduce worry, stress, and time off for caregivers. So we will go to the doctor's appointments with you. We will set those up and give your families updates. We will do the care plan meetings at the senior care communities. We do so many. I mean, then there are things we haven't even been asked to do, but we generally step in and do them because it just needs to get done. I've had several clients who have lived abroad. They've lived in a different country, different time zone, and I've been hired to assist because they cannot be hands-on. And we become a really great team. We're on boots on the ground, and they're kind of navigating the financial piece or selling the home or what have you. But we help with all of that. We help with all of that. And I think, Kirsten, are we on to our last slide? Is there another slide? Or
No,
was
I
that
think
the
I
last?
think we are wrapped up, and you are so generous and gracious with your time today.
Yes,
If you are okay to answer a few questions, I know there's some people who might have had to drop off right at 12 noon for
yes.
another commitment.
Yeah,
But if you're okay to answer a few questions, I saw there were some in the chat. I do want
yeah.
to answer one, which is that I'm going to have to ask Jihan, and I'm not going to put her on the spot, but I will ask her about the slides. Typically, when someone presents to us, that's material that they've created. And so, I'll ask Jihan if that's something we can share, but sometimes it's not, just because of the efforts that they've put into creating their own work.
Absolutely. And Kirsten, I'll get back to you on that and get them sent over to you in such a fashion. But I did want to address someone talking about sundowning, and I alluded to it a little bit. This is generally when you'll find someone with dementia. You'll find this more in the mid to later stages. Again, this is when they are a lot more dependent upon someone else and task and sort of being told what to do with their day. That by the end of the day, you find them so exhausted and sort of agitated a bit. And it's what we call sundowning. If you think about it in a very non-clinical but common sense way, think about seasonal affective disorder. It's what we all kind of go through when we go from the longer days in the warmer months into the shorter days in the colder months. We all suffer a little bit of depression and sadness. Why? We're not being beamed with the daylight and all of that awesome vitamin C. So by the end of the day, we're kind of all feeling, uh, not feeling the best or what have you. But now put yourselves in the shoes of, and yes, they can absolutely have my contact information. And Kirsten and I will make sure we get that out to you because I did not include it on the slide. But now think about someone who has been battling their brain all day long. So although we're telling them what to do, how to do it, where to go, what not to wear, they still have their own thoughts and their own internal workings that are ramping up throughout the day because they can't understand why they can't understand what's happening, what they're hearing, what they're feeling, what they want to say. And now you're throwing an entire day at them. I mean, by the end of the day, they're exhausted. The brain has done all that it can. And so for them to be a little bit frustrated by the end of the day, knowing that all of those things have worked against them, it's kind of normal. But instead of us being frustrated with it, let's just put the name on it. They're likely sundowning, but let's be cautious about what we do with them between 4 and 6 outside of dinner. Maybe it's not been a good day for someone, and so maybe dinner doesn't need to happen between 4 and 6. Maybe they have a later lunch, or maybe we give them a nap and we feed them around 7 or 8. Let's go along with their journey and try not to make them fit into a scenario that does not work for them during a certain time of day. Some people we don't call it sundowning in the morning. I've heard some members do beautifully in the evening. They can't get them to wake up and get out of the bed. It takes them 2 or 3 hours, right? So we kind of have to go along with their journey, but I just wanted to address that about sundown again. Kirsten, what were the other questions I might have missed?
Yeah, so we've recorded today's session, which we'll
Okay.
share a link to. We'll share your information,
Yes.
and your contact information, and then up to you if we can share your slides
Yeah.
in a way that preserves what you've created.
Sure.
And then you had a compliment in the chat that this is one of the most detailed presentations of dementia. I completely agree. I've done obviously I've been the recipient of a lot of training on dementia, and it's just very, very comprehensive what you've shared with us today. So let me see if there are any more questions. And then what I want to share also, and I'll send this out in an email, is that if you enjoyed learning from Jihan today, we are trying to always bring in experts on different subjects related to dementia every month. And so, within the next couple days, you'll be able to go onto our website, look up the next event. We will be having Dr. Yanessa Humbert. She's a speech therapist, talking about the aging swallow, the physiology of it, how cognition relates to that, and just the realities of a dementia diagnosis. So you are welcome to register for that. That'll be in January on the 13th at 11 a.m. Same format webinar. Jihan, maybe you'll be able to join us for that as well as a participant this time and not have the pressure of presenting such excellent content. Thank you for
I
today.
would love to. Listen, geriatric care managers, just people in the industry, we're all learning, Kirsten, aren't we? And I'd
Always learning.
love to learn something new that I can then apply to what I'm doing, or so that something makes sense. And I'll say, oh, that's what they were going through. I never went through that before. So
Yep.
I just might join you. And I thank you all so much for allowing me to present. And, all of these different types of dementia can be a presentation in and of themselves,
So
but I
true.
knew we were within a time frame. And so Kirsten and I will work together for 2026 to see what else I can bring to you.
All right. Thank